Good evening, I'm Lisa Townsend, your Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey, and I would like to welcome you to our online community event for Epsom and Ewell. I am joined this evening in our studio at Mount Brown in Guildford at Police HQ by Chief Constable Tim Meyer and by your Borough Commander, Inspector John Vale. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. So we carried out a series of in-person events before Christmas, and we were in Epsom earlier on in the year. But we want to provide an opportunity for those who weren't able to get there in person to be able to join us here this evening online, and you are very welcome. So you're going to be hearing from the three of us about Surrey Police. You're going to hear from the Chief Constable about his plans for Surrey Police, and from your Borough Commander about what's been going on in Epsom and Ewell recently and what his plans are for the year ahead. Tim Meyer has been in post now for nearly 9 months, appointed back in January of last year, took up the post in April and has been developing his plan, and it's a really interesting one, and I'm really looking forward to you all hearing it. You do have an opportunity once we've spoken to ask your questions. If you do have a question, either a local one or more generally about Surrey Police, please do pop your question in the comments section, either on YouTube or on Facebook, wherever you're watching, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible tonight. If we don't get round to answering your question, then a member of the force will be in touch to answer your question directly, but please do pop your questions in the box there. So it's a really important time for policing in our county, and thanks to the work that Surrey Police have done to recruit what was actually more than our fair share of the government's 20,000 extra police officers. It's also hugely in thanks to the amount of money that you have put towards council tax and policing in Surrey, and that's allowed us to do that. It means that Surrey Police has grown by 395 officers, and that makes the force the biggest in its history, which is great. Does mean we have a very young workforce, and so they are going through training now, and then after that they will be out and about in our communities, where I know you all want to see them, and we do too. Now, as well as holding Surrey Police to account and the Chief Constable to account for the service that you receive, it's also my role to set the police and crime plan, and that sets the direction for the force. And the priorities within my police and crime plan are protecting people from harm, working with residents so that you feel safe, preventing violence against women and girls, ensuring safer Surrey roads, and strengthening the relationship between you and Surrey Police, which is what events like this evening are all about. In the last year, my office has awarded over £5 million to local services, and this has included more funding than ever before for preventing violence against women and girls, which I know is something that both the Borough Commander and the Chief Constable are going to talk about. We've also been actively working with the force to improve the service that you receive around antisocial behaviour, something that I know matters to an awful lot of you, but also the response that you receive when you call 101, which is our non-emergency number. Now, Surrey Police is an absolutely fantastic organisation, but the demands placed on our police officers and our police staff are greater than ever before. As the Police and Crime Commissioner, I also oversee Surrey Police's budget and all of its assets. And it includes setting the amount of council tax that we all pay each year towards policing. I have to balance the cost pressures that I know we're all facing with my goal to provide the Chief Constable with the resources that he needs in order to fulfil the police and crime plan that he is going to talk to you about shortly, his plan. And it does mean that we have to find a further £17 to £20 million worth of savings over the coming 4 years. Times are really difficult, both for organisations across our county and our country, and also for families. So setting the council tax is one of the most difficult tasks that I face each year. And the Chief Constable is going to talk to you shortly about his vision for the force. And that really concentrates on what policing does best. That's fighting crime in our local communities and protecting people. And the Chief Constable and I both know, because we spoke to you, that that's what you want to see as well from our police force. And I believe that the Chief Constable's plan is going to significantly boost the service that we get across all of our communities in Surrey. But in order to achieve it, we must maintain appropriate funding for our police teams, which is why I have to think very carefully about making sound long-term financial plans. So if you haven't already done so, I would like you to have a say in the council tax consultation. It is currently live and it's running until the end of this month. You can find the link to it in the comments section of this meeting. It's on my office's website and across all of our social media feeds. Please do take just a few minutes to fill it out. Now, the survey asks you to consider whether you would support a £13 a year rise, which is what the government is setting, £10, £11 or £12 a year, or a figure under £10. The Chief Constable has been very clear with me that an increase below £10, and that's on an average Band D property, would mean further savings having to be found by Surrey Police. An increase of between 10 and 13 would mean the force can keep almost at pace with inflation and it could keep staff cuts to a minimum. The maximum increase of £13, which again is what the government has asked us to do, would provide the Chief Constable with most of the resources that he needs for his plans for the force, but Surrey Police would still need to find at least £17 million worth of savings over the next 4 years. It's important, of course, that we make every efficiency that we possibly can, especially while we're asking you for more money. And so there is a huge amount of work going on this programme as well, which I know that the Chief Constable is going to talk about. But your contributions through council tax make an enormous difference to Surrey Police. For every extra pound raised, it means that the force gets £500,000 in return. So it is an enormous difference, and it is what will help the Chief Constable deliver on his plan. So, as I said, setting the precept is not something I take lightly, but I do want to hear your views on it as well, because they are all taken into consideration. You can see the QR code on your screen right now. If you scan the QR code, it will take you straight to the survey. The survey will take you less than 5 minutes to fill out, and I would really appreciate your views. I'm now going to pass on to the Chief Constable so that he can outline his plan and talk to you about his vision for the force. And as I said, if you do have any questions for us, please do pop them in the comments boxes below. Thank you. Chief Constable.
Thank you, Police and Crime Commissioner, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to talk for just 10 minutes or so about my plan for the force. There are 3 main headings and a few extra areas under each of those I'll talk about in a bit more detail. So the first main heading is that Surrey Police is here to fight crime and to protect people. And though that might seem rather obvious, I do think it's important to restate our commitment to doing well those things which only the police can do. And if we're going to fight crime and to protect you, then we need to prevent crime and we need to solve the problems which give rise to it. Surrey has a good track record in crime prevention and problem solving, established long before I got here and rightly praised by our inspectorate, and also officers and staff have been pleased to receive some awards in respect of their problem solving with partners in relation to problems such as drug dealing and antisocial behaviour. But we now need to refocus this experience on the sorts of problems which we are encountering today. And that includes violence against women and girls, which is my top operational priority for the force. I'm going to draw out 3 particular areas of this problem to illustrate our determination to do better. Now, the first is domestic abuse. And in cases of domestic abuse, we see all too often very dangerous people, very vulnerable people together behind closed doors. And we know that victims and survivors of domestic abuse are attacked many times before they report it to the police. And therefore, when the officer or staff member responds, it's absolutely vital they take that opportunity to provide the very best care they can to the victim and to ensure that the offender is brought to justice in order that he poses a risk no longer not only to that victim, but also that we protect victims in the future. And that's why we're seeing our rate of arrest for domestic abuse and our charge rate increase pretty substantially. We need to make sure that women and girls feel safe in our public spaces, our nighttime economy being a case in point. And that's why we have been trialling Operation Shield, and I'm sure the Borough Commander will talk more about this in his own area, which makes the very best use of highly trained female and male officers in behavioural detection to ensure that through covert policing and a high visibility uniform policing, we're able to identify people on our nighttime economies who aren't there for any legitimate reason but have travelled only to prey on the vulnerable. Operation Shield will become an integral part of our policing operations in the future. And finally, on violence against women and girls, we must of course increase the rate of charging for rape and sexual offences, and with that the quality of service that we provide to victims. Surrey Police has over the last 6 months began to implement the principles of Operation Soteria, which is a national initiative developed by investigators and academics to ensure that we better investigate the crime of rape in particular, and that means better understanding victims and how it is they might behave in particular circumstances, dispelling many of the myths which have been associated with this type of crime, ensuring that we consider all of a suspect's behaviour, which might, when properly evidenced, give weight to the accusation, and ensuring that we understand the entire situation which presents itself, alongside providing the very best care and support to victims, not only with our expertly trained officers, but also our partners in support services. And I'm confident that over the coming months and years, we'll see that rate of detection and ultimately protection increase. We've got to investigate crime thoroughly. That means following the good lines of inquiry that so often the public give us, whether that's ring doorbell footage, suspicious activity that they've spotted, eyewitness testimony of a particular crime, or some forensic evidence at a burglary. It also means making the best use of our own expertise, whether that's automatic number plate recognition, which might capture an offending vehicle as it leaves the scene, or many other lines of inquiries which we could follow, because Surrey Police does not currently enjoy a particularly good rate of detecting crime and putting criminals before the courts. We're seeing that increase at quite a rate, but I'm determined it will do so even more so over the coming months and years, and put Surrey residents in the position where they know that their force is performing extremely well when compared with others nationally. One such crime where we're seeing many more arrests and charges is shoplifting. The last thing that we want is for modestly paid workers in our shops, on whom communities rely to provide an essential service and build a community spirit around, being at risk or feeling in fear as they go about serving the public. And we don't want people who are conscientious enough to pay for their goods seeing others flagrantly commit theft. So officers are really making sure they're working hard with shops to prevent these crimes, but also better to respond, make more arrests, charge more people. We had a dedicated operation on shoplifting before Christmas, and will continue to up the intensity against shoplifters in the years ahead. We have to pursue criminals relentlessly. When you give us a named suspect to pursue for a violent crime, a burglary or fraud or some other such offence, we need to see them arrested swiftly, and we also need to make use of all of the powers which Parliament has given us over the last few decades to keep criminals under control, whether that's taking criminal money out of the system through powers of seizure and confiscation, or using preventative powers against those who would commit antisocial behaviour, sex offences, domestic abuse and stalking. We must provide the very best victim and witness care that we can. Very often in cases such as stalking, harassment, rape and sexual offences, our victim is our only witness. So the care has to be exemplary. Staff and officers understand that what might be a daily experience for them is a once-in-a-lifetime hideous experience for the victim. And with that in mind, we have to treat victims as we would expect our own family member to be treated in the circumstances. That means we investigate the crime thoroughly, we pursue the criminal relentlessly, and we serve the victim tirelessly. We cannot operate without your trust and confidence. Otherwise, you cannot be expected to confide in us. And it's this confiding in us which gives us the information, the intelligence, and the evidence that we can use to protect you. I don't expect you to trust us if we don't exhibit high standards of professional behaviour. That means looking smart, addressing people with appropriate etiquette. It means realising that whilst policing is difficult and mistakes will be made for which we must apologise, there can be no place for racism, for misogyny, for dishonesty, or for the abuse of our authority for any nasty purpose, such as sexual exploitation. I'm not so complacent as to imagine that these sorts of crimes couldn't happen in Surrey. Thankfully, it's largely elsewhere that we've seen them, but we're not complacent. That means good standards of vetting, re-vetting, making sure that we follow up complaints, making sure that we robustly investigate misconduct. And of course, on those rare occasions where officers are found to have misconducted themselves, it's more often than not as a consequence of the crime or misconduct offence being reported by a colleague, which shows that here in Surrey, the police will positively stand up against poor standards where they expect good standards to be exhibited. I want Surrey Police to reflect our communities. I want this to be an organisation which doesn't simply include people, but is a place where everyone feels that they can fulfil their potential and belong. That means recruiting from all sections of society, not just because we want to be statistically representative, but because I know that it's in all sections of society, across every characteristic, that we will find the brilliant investigators, first-line responders, PCSOs, call handlers, and many more besides on whom the public rely. We need to spend your money wisely because there is money to be saved. The police service is no different. We have to save a considerable sum over the next few years because we're subject to the same pressure of interest rate rises and inflation as any other organisation. I hope you'll be reassured to know that we're working very closely with our colleagues in other police forces to identify how it is that we can save money by improving our processes, our technology, our handling of contracts in such a way which means that we don't then have to cut or change essential services or in any way affect the number of people we employ on whom you rely. That means not only making savings, but it means making sure that our mindset is always to spend public money wisely. That pound has been earned. It could have been spent on the individual and their family. It has instead been entrusted to me to spend to the greatest possible good for you. That money could have gone to any other public service, and therefore I'm trying to impress upon officers that the pound that didn't go to health or defence or education has come to police must by our staff and police officers be spent productively and efficiently. I want our officers and staff to be here for you when you need them. And I want us to be clear that we put the service of you before any self-interest, individually or as an organisation. That means responding swiftly, whether to 999, 101, a report at the front counter or some digital contact. Over the years, the police have rightly responded where there is a real and immediate risk to someone's mental health to deal with that person in crisis. We've done that for good reason and with best intent, but inevitably that has taken us away from the many things which only we can do to investigate the crime, protect the victim of domestic abuse, catch the fraudster, the rapist or the burglar. That's why we're working closely with partners in mental health, in other health services, in ambulance and the local authority to deliver the government-backed Right Care, Right Person scheme, which will ensure that the very best, most expert care gets to people in mental health crisis, and that the police officers who, however well intended, aren't best placed to care for people in those circumstances are freed up to deal with those things which only we can. The last 2 points. We need to be resilient and we need to be prepared, whether for a pandemic, a protest, or to help another police force in need with a major incident. That's why my senior colleagues are always thinking about how it is that we need to plan and prepare for the next big challenge which might present itself to us. And finally, policing is tough. We deal with people in their moments of greatest need. We need to be at our very best when, for the caller or the victim, things are at their worst. That means I need to ensure that our officers and staff are fit, healthy and safe in order that they are resilient and prepared to look after you. So we have a comprehensive programme of work going on to ensure that fitness, health and safety of our staff and officers is protected, as that's the best way of making sure that we have a fit workforce to fight crime and protect people. And with that, I shall hand over to John, who's going to talk about things more local to you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I'm John Vale. I'm the local Borough Commander for Epsom and Ewell, a post that I've been in for the last 4 years. Now in February I'll be handing over to my colleague, Inspector Kelly Clifton Sinclair, who's taking up my role in the coming weeks, and I know that she's very keen to get stuck into local issues. Now during my short presentation I'll give you an oversight of the teams that serve you, the local communities of Epsom and Ewell, and also touch upon some of the teams that go to supporting my teams locally. I'll also look at the local priorities, what we do locally to try and make a difference, and also provide an update around recent crime and incident trends, including several positive results that we've achieved. So looking at the structure first of all of the local policing teams, we have two main teams based in Epsom and Ewell, the Neighbourhood Patrol Team and the Safer Neighbourhood Team. Now the NPT or Neighbourhood Patrol Team are the response officers who respond to the vast majority of the calls for service. The Neighbourhood Policing Investigation Team, who cover the whole of East Surrey as a whole, who are in the process of being expanded, are seeking to drive efforts to drive quality crime investigations, and they hold the bulk of the crime investigations for the borough and deal with the vast majority of prisoners in custody. Now any crimes requiring specialist oversight or ownership, such as child abuse or more serious crimes including domestic abuse, will be passed on to those specialist teams for ongoing ownership. As you can see on the slide there, the neighbourhood team is divided into two main areas, the north and the south of the borough. Although if the need arises, of course, all officers will support each other in dealing with any issues across the area. You can find full details of your local team on the Surrey Police website. The role of our neighbourhood officers is primarily to identify chronic issues within the community and to take a problem-solving approach to addressing them. It could be anything from antisocial behaviour, child criminal exploitation, or other matters that cause a high demand on local policing services. We also have youth engagement officers. Their primary role is to engage with young people and other agencies such as children's services to specifically deal with risks around young people. They will conduct joint visits, for example, safeguard young people who are perhaps starting along the wrong path. And they work closely with our own safeguarding teams to address that child criminal exploitation I've already mentioned and child sexual exploitation as well. Also working to support our policing teams locally are your community support officers. They do some really fantastic work, but unfortunately we are quite low in numbers at the moment, specifically in Epsom and Ewell. That's primarily due to the fact that so many are joining up to become police officers. We're currently recruiting PCSOs, so I really would encourage anyone who knows somebody who may be interested in a role of PCSO to look at our recruitment website. The local teams in Epsom and Ewell are supported, as I say, by numerous centralised teams, some of which I've highlighted on the slide. And many of those will provide support across a range of areas which would be beyond the capability and capacity of us to deliver locally. Some of those you may have heard of before, such as our dog officers or firearms teams, but potentially others are less well known, such as our high harm perpetrator units or child exploitation team, for example. So now moving on to the priorities for Epsom and Ewell. My priorities, as you can see on the slide there, have remained consistent for the last few years, and they are all intrinsically linked. Looking at building trust and confidence first, as the Chief Constable said, we police by consent in this country, and therefore without the trust and confidence of the vast majority of the population, we're very unlikely to be able to achieve our core policing roles of keeping people safe and tackling crime. A central part of this is effectively engaging with our communities, and as we've already said, this is one such event. We need to continue to strengthen our ties with local communities. We've had quite a lot of success with online engagement through social media, but we've also started to increase our in-person engagement, such as through our Meet the Beat events. And they can sometimes focus on specific issues. The picture on the end under partnerships there is an example of one such event, a stand in Epsom Town Centre on violence against women and girls. And we specifically target this engagement where the community tell us their main issues are. Looking at problem solving then, so problem solving is one of our core functions as a neighbourhood team. And through positive engagement, we can proactively identify and tackle the most serious issues across the borough. And that's around using a structured and evidence-based approach, understanding what the problem is, why it's happening, and using appropriate measures in response. Key to this is working with partners, and that takes us on to the last section. And of course, we work very closely with many partners across the borough to tackle vulnerability and perpetrators. The main partnership locally is the Community Safety Partnership. And there are a number of partners within this umbrella of organisations, both voluntary and statutory. And each agency has the ability to really make a difference in reducing vulnerability and community harm. I'll give a very quick example as to how some of these priorities work in practice. So through engagement with local businesses, we identified an individual who was causing ongoing harm financially in terms of repeat shoplifting offences. We know that a large amount of acquisitive crime is committed by relatively few individuals, and therefore it's important that we focus on those individuals and the locations that are repeatedly targeted. The local neighbourhood team located and arrested this individual, and through extensive inquiries, including securing key evidence such as CCTV and witness statements, were able to charge this individual, and he's now awaiting his day in court. Well, that's not where the work ends. This individual is now on the agenda for the Community Harm and Risk Management meeting, and that's a local forum that I chair for the borough. And numerous agencies are involved in that forum, and I'll be relying heavily on partners to carry out interventions to support that individual, whether that be around drug misuse or housing. Now, the impact on that, clearly there has been a positive impact, because that individual who was previously coming to notice several times a day now hasn't come to police notice in the last 6 weeks. So moving on to my last slide, I'm going to touch upon some statistics and successes. Epsom and Ewell is the smallest borough in Surrey geographically. It has the highest population density, and its location adjacent to Greater London and various other factors all impact on demand to local policing services. So as you can see there, we've had nearly 11,000 calls for service within the borough in the last year, and that's a slight decrease on the previous year. Of those, over 2,000 were immediate grade incidents, and that's where officers were required to respond on an emergency response rather. As the Chief Constable has touched upon, many of these calls for service were not related to crime, but instead to mental health or other concerns for safety. We received 600 reports of concerns for people's safety and 200 reports of missing people. I've included some general crime trends on the slide there. Overall, total offences have increased slightly. The majority of that rise includes an increase in theft-related offending, such as shoplifting, for example. On a positive note, we've seen a reduction in residential burglary, serious sexual offences and other high-harm offences, including hate crime and domestic abuse. We've also seen a 25% reduction in antisocial behaviour. I'll mention a couple of other successes as well, so all I believe I have time for, but in the last 12 months, we've dismantled 22 county drug lines that were operating within the borough. County lines, as you may know, are normally controlled by organised crime groups in the London area. And they will send drug runners into places such as Epsom and Ewell to deal drugs, primarily crack cocaine and heroin. And many of the runners that they send will be vulnerable children themselves. And what we have seen in the borough is that they will cuckoo, that is to take over and exploit an address, which is normally a vulnerable drug user, in order to sell drugs. Now, as a result of this activity, there's a huge impact on local communities. Drug users need to fund their habits, and this leads to an increase in theft. Each one of those 22 county drug lines that have been disrupted would have involved huge amounts of work from many different policing teams, and it's often the local policing team who kickstart that work. Perhaps they arrest a runner for the drug line. We then work with various other policing teams, as I say, including the Metropolitan Police, to deal with the heart of the organised crime group. Each one of those 22 county line disruptions would have involved numerous arrests and interventions. And following up, the neighbourhood team will continue to work with partners to protect victims and prevent them from becoming victims again. For example, we've obtained 7 premise closure orders from court in the last year. And having spoken to partners in the last few days, including housing associations, it's now actually quite rare for us to receive reports of cuckooing in Epsom and Ewell. And I think that's testament to some of the hard work of police and partners over the last year to tackle that organised crime and protect vulnerable people. I've already mentioned one of our key partnership meetings, CHARM, the Community Harm and Risk Management meeting. And that's discussed numerous individuals who are either vulnerable victims or perpetrators, and the intention is to reduce their ongoing impact on communities. These cases are not publicised due to the sensitivities involved, but they have a real impact on reducing vulnerability and preventing crime. Now, I don't have much time to run through many more examples, but there is just one final example I'd like to touch upon, and that is our work against tackling violence against women and girls, specifically in the Epsom Town Centre nighttime economy. In 2021, we secured, in conjunction with Epsom and Ewell Borough Council, nearly £300,000 worth of funding from the Home Office, which was as a result of a bid via the PCC. And that's funded numerous additions to our arsenal to be able to support the town centre and the licensed premises. So, for example, CCTV, we've replaced all of the CCTV in the town centre, drink spiking, testing kits, training for licensed venue staff, and support for the really valuable work that the street pastors do in our town centre. Now, running alongside this, I've developed some tactics and policing tactics under Operation Shield, which the Chief Constable's touched upon already, and it's activity within Epsom that's actually leading the way across the county. Now, most simply, Operation Shield involves behavioural detection officers. They're covert, so they're in plain clothes, and they will deploy into town centres and into licensed venues. And they really, they have some specific training to be able to pick up on predatory behaviours, which would indicate that they're there to target women and girls. What they then do is they will indicate to some uniformed officers to carry out an intervention. and the uniformed officers will go and investigate that individual, stop check them, and complete a risk assessment to determine what level of risk that they may pose. As a result of this, a number of males have been identified within the town centre in Epsom, specifically in the nighttime economy. We're often finding that these individuals are travelling long distances to come to the town and clearly have no reason to be there. And through these activities, we're really aiming to prevent people from becoming victims of sexual offences. And over the last year, I'm pleased to say that there's been a 50% reduction in sexual assaults in Epsom town centre. And hopefully that's as a result of the hard work that police and partners have undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Borough Commander. I think that was a really comprehensive canter through. And we've got about 20 minutes for questions. I've got quite a few questions come through. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. As I said, if we don't get to answer your question immediately, then somebody will come back to you. And actually, John, you've answered some of the questions already, but I'm going to make sure that everybody gets to have their say. So the first question that we had we've actually had two questions. One's more of a comment from Andrew on Facebook. He says, no one likes paying more tax, but we do want the police to tackle crime and prevent things getting worse. So I'm sure that the tax maximum level will ultimately be accepted. This is why I want people to make sure that they fill in the council tax survey, if at all possible, please. It does help us come to a decision. Last year, people did go for the maximum, which was actually £15. It's less this year. And we'll wait and see what the reports are. But I do want to be able to give as much money to the Chief Constable as possible so that he can fulfil the plan he's told you about. The second one from Andrew, John, you've actually already covered quite a lot of it, but I will just say that sort of what he's come out with. So he's asked about direct drug-related crime. And he says, direct drug-related crime, along with the knock-on effect of shoplifting, antisocial behaviour and county lines, is, in my opinion, the number one issue to tackle. The number of people whose lives are blighted by drugs or by drug gangs in their neighbourhood is not acceptable. Now, you've already talked about the 22 county lines disrupted, which of course that's the important thing, isn't it? It's about getting those people so that it doesn't filter down, and you're doing some really, really fantastic work on that. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to, but I know that it is a big priority for you at Epsom and Ewell. It has been over the last 4 years.
Absolutely, it's something that as the PCC's mentioned there, it impacts Epsom and Ewell perhaps more seriously than other boroughs, and that's again due to the geographical location of Epsom and Ewell, the fact that we've got really good transport links into and out of the borough. As I said in my part of the presentation, the amount of or the impact that these drug lines have on communities can't really be underestimated, and it's a lot of it's also behind closed doors, actually cocooning a vulnerable person and taking over their address. We wouldn't think it would happen in today's day and age. So it's something that we really need to be alive to, that risk, that vulnerability, being proactive around it. So they're actually working with partners, including housing associations, to ensure that we are visiting vulnerable people, making sure that we're picking up on any risk at an early stage.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. I've had one from somebody anonymous on YouTube. We've all mentioned that a large number of officers have been recruited. He says, but she says, I never see bobbies on the beach. Do you have any plans to increase on-foot patrols? Now, as I said, we've had a lot of people who've been recruited, who are joining. You talked a bit about PCSOs, and I would reiterate your call. If anybody is interested in being a PCSO as community-minded, then please do join. So I'm going to come to both of you. First of all, John, Epsom and Ewell, and I know there's been a real challenge there around it, but the work that you're doing. And then Chief Constable, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about on-foot patrols and how important they are, but also that other side of policing where we're policing areas where people don't see as well, and why that's important.
Yeah. So in terms of increasing visibility, that's a really big concern and something that we're really focused on as well. Now, clearly we can't be everywhere all of the time. However, as I said earlier, we listen to what the community has to say in terms of where the main issues are taking place, and that is really where when we overlay that with crime data and statistics and other intelligence, that's really what directs our patrol plans. Now clearly we want to increase our presence in the town centre, particularly around shoplifting and the nighttime economy. As I've already mentioned, we need to make sure that we're there to support the businesses as well. We've got a number of estates within the borough as well that we need to address antisocial behaviour more robustly. So, in the last week we've had all of our push bike service. So, my team is going to be going out on push bikes. As you know, if you're an Epsom and you're resident, it's full of alleyways, and it's really difficult to catch up with people who are up to no good if we're on foot or in a car. So therefore, having access to pedal bikes, it seems very simple, but that's something that is hopefully going to make a bit of a difference locally. So hopefully you'll see that more in the coming weeks.
Excellent. Chief Constable?
Well, it's such an important question because, of course, there is a real value in visibility, not only in police officers and PCSOs preventing crime by their mere presence, but providing reassurance to the community and the opportunity to engage. But as the PCC implies, there are a great many other things which we have to do which cannot be achieved through high visibility policing alone, such as the investigation of domestic abuse, harassment, online paedophilia involving indecent images of children, fraud. One could sadly go on, and that requires a different policing approach, but offenders for those crimes still need to be brought to justice and monitored. However, all is not lost in respect of visibility, because we are determined to identify the most serious hotspots for crimes such as antisocial behaviour, shoplifting, open space drug dealing across Surrey, and deploy our highly visible resources most visibly to those areas. I wish I could deliver visibility for its own sake across the county, but I have to be realistic in that things have to be divided in order to try to meet the needs of all of those different crime types. But please rest assured we will be putting as many uniforms as we can in those hotspots, and in so doing reducing the crime which affects them, I hope.
Excellent, thank you very much. Another question from YouTube. I'm grateful to hear about the efforts to protect women and girls in the context of the nighttime economy. Are Surrey Police's efforts to tackle spiking proving to be effective? Now, John, you've already actually talked a bit about this, and yes, they are proving effective, and it is a real example, isn't it, of partnership working. So there's the Safer Streets Fund, which the Home Office releases a number of tranches every year. As police and crime commissioners, we can bid for our areas, normally up to about 3 different areas, and one of them a couple of years ago was, of course, Epsom and Ewell, and it's really great to see the money going. So great. Is there anything else that you want to add about the nighttime economy and the work that's been happening? Or Chief Constable, you and I have both made preventing violence against women and girls our priority, so I wonder if you could also talk a little bit about that work as well.
So you mentioned drink spiking there, so that's been a really key focus for us, and primarily around raising awareness, because my view is that it's a greatly underreported crime type, and significant risks involved. So as I mentioned, we have put a lot of time and effort into speaking with licensed premises, ensuring that they are aware, their staff are trained around recognising the signs and symptoms of drink spiking, and really alerting us at an early stage so that we can make an effective intervention and try and, of course, locate and arrest the perpetrator, whilst obviously delivering the best service that we possibly can to the victim. We did see a rise in spiking, I believe it was last year, and then we did put a lot of effort into addressing that, and the number of reports has come down. Obviously, I'm not naive to the fact that we know it's still taking place. So I would always, urge people just to be vigilant and report any concerns to us.
Thank
Thank you. Well, I can't endorse enough the view advanced by the Borough Commander in respect of the importance of partnership, whether with licensed venues or the council, or of course the public themselves, in respect of being vigilant. People can take sensible precautionary and preventative measures, but the main focus must be on the perpetrators themselves, which is why operations such as Operation Shield, which combine good high visibility policing of the type which was advocated in the previous question, with cutting edge techniques to identify the sorts of people who would carry out precisely the sort of awful thing which is described, is a really, really important approach. And thereafter, if anyone is unfortunate enough to be the victim of such a terrible crime as spiking, I can't overemphasize the importance of reporting it, because the information that you have could be absolutely vital, not only to protect you and ensure that you get justice, but to keep that venue, that area safe, and bring the offender themselves before the courts. So please do report it.
Thank you. A very, very important crime. And I have to admit that when I suffered a spiking incident at university, which is well over 20 years ago now, I didn't report it. But it is so important, isn't it? Because if we don't know about it, then we can't do anything about it. So thank you very much for that question. We've got another question on YouTube. This is one for you, Chief Constable. I understand retention of officers is a challenge. What are Surrey's plans to retain experience and ensure officers don't lose morale and leave? It's so important, isn't it?
It's an extremely important question, and I'm grateful for it being posed. There are, broadly speaking, two challenges here. As the PCC has said, we have benefited in Surrey from this enormous national uplift programme, which has seen us recruit a great many more police officers. Now, some police officers do leave early in their service, and whilst we would prefer people to serve with us for 30, 35 years or beyond, if people very quickly realise that the job isn't for them, that of course is probably for the best. But generally, we don't have a crisis of recruitment and retention in respect of police officers. It's more challenging in certain disciplines than others. So it's more difficult to encourage people to become and stay as detectives than was previously the case, which is why we have lots of initiatives in place to encourage people both to join directly as detectives under that fast track scheme, and also to transfer as detectives when they've been a uniformed constable for a while. The challenge in respect of recruitment and retention is more acute in relation to police staff. Police staff, I cannot overemphasise, provide vital operational services. They are the ones answering the calls to people in crisis, providing specialist forensic services at the scenes of crime and using digital evidence. There are communications experts, our finance experts, our analysts, and many more other things besides. And they make up a critical part of our force. And it can, in Surrey, where the recruitment market is challenging, be difficult to recruit and retain police staff. So I can't say enough that if you are someone who is interested in investigation or wants to serve people in a crisis, to be at your best when for that person things are at their worst, you have an interest in forensic science, perhaps, then there is a career for you in Surrey Police, if not as a police officer, then as one of our vital police staff.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. And it really is the most fantastic service, whether you are somebody that prefers working with computers and IT, or whether you're somebody who wants to be out and about and doing all the fantastic partnership work that John's talked about, that the Chief Constable has talked about, then please do come and join us. There's a lot of opportunity there, so it's great. John, this is something you and I were talking about actually just before this meeting started. We've had a question again on YouTube. It looks as though car crime has increased significantly. What are your plans to reduce and tackle this? Now, it doesn't specifically say keyless car theft, but we were talking just before this meeting about keyless car theft. So I wonder if you could update.
Yeah, thank you. So as we know, keyless car theft is on the rise. It's a persistent issue across Surrey and beyond. and it's committed by organised crime groups, many of whom are not based in the Surrey area. Now, of course, there are several simple actions that residents and communities can take to try and prevent their vehicles from being taken. For example, the use of Faraday bags, CCTV, for example. If you're fortunate enough to have a driveway and a gate, for example, making sure that that gate is locked. But clearly there is a lot more work that we need to be doing as the police to tackle this. And I know that recently we've been undertaking operations with our colleagues in the Metropolitan Police, Essex Police, Kent and Sussex as well, to address this cross-border crime type. And that involves specialist resources being brought in, such as our road policing team and others as well, to ensure that we're out at the right times and patrolling the right areas. And we have seen arrests and we have seen a number of cars recovered, but we need to do more to tackle the heart of this organised crime, which is often not even based in the UK. So it's an ongoing challenge that we are very much focused on addressing.
Thank you very much. A question on mental health, and will the force still be attending to people who are experiencing a mental health crisis? Now, this in the wider context is around, I think, the Right Care, Right Person initiative, which I've been fortunate enough to lead on nationally for police and crime commissioners, and the Chief Constable talked about it briefly. But I know there have been some misconceptions around how it's going to work. I think the important thing is that everything is being done in partnership. We work very closely with partners across the county. Both the Chief Constable and I sit on the Health and Wellbeing Board, where we make sure that we're feeding in to conversations there around the wider health piece. But I wonder, Chief Constable, if you could just sort of allay some of those concerns about the police turning up when somebody is in danger or a crime is being committed.
Certainly, it's an extremely important question, and of course there are many cases where mental health and crime overlap. They can't simply be separated, but if one imagines a case where no crime is alleged or disclosed and there is a real and immediate risk to someone as a consequence of a mental health crisis, then of course we will do our duty to respond immediately in order to protect life. The problem over recent years has been the significant number of cases where perhaps there is not such a real and immediate risk, but nevertheless the police have been called as a service of last resort, and officers, though they are somewhat trained in dealing with people in mental health crises, are not expertly trained, and they are not therefore able to provide the optimum care which that person needs in those circumstances. And there are other cases where officers and staff might find themselves having to go and check on welfare in relatively low risk cases, where we would respectfully suggest that that would be better carried out by the agency with primary responsibility for those people. But we are not simply withdrawing from this activity. We are working very closely at a senior and practitioner level with colleagues in mental health, more general health services, the local authority and the ambulance service, to work out a proper plan for how this can be achieved. And I'm confident in the coming months and years, not only will we ensure that better services are provided to people with those needs, but also that officers and staff will increasingly be deployed less to those cases and be available instead to get on and deal with the rural crime, the domestic abuse, the antisocial behaviour, which only they can attend to.
Thank you very much. One final question. We are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask for a very brief answer on this. Actually, Borough Commander, this is for you. So obviously Epsom and Ewell, given its geography, we're very fortunate. It's got an awful lot of commuters, a lot of people who travel in and out of the area. I wonder if you could talk briefly about the work that you do with British Transport Police and how important, again, that partnership work is.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I've already mentioned, we do a lot of work across borders with our partners, particularly in the Metropolitan Police, where obviously Epsom and Ewell is geographically located adjacent to. But we mustn't forget the British Transport Police, who cover our train network. And as we know, a lot of criminals will use the train network to get in and out of the borough. So we've conducted numerous operations with the British Transport Police using equipment such as knife archers and drugs dogs as well to really target hard in our area, making sure that we're identifying those coming into our communities via the train network to commit crime, and that's something that we're going to be continuing over the coming weeks and months.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who has joined us this evening. Thank you to John Vale, Borough Commander. We wish him well in his new post, which he'll be taking up next month, and look forward to welcoming the new Borough Commander. Thank you very much to Tim de Meyer, our Chief Constable, to Susan, who has been ably translating throughout this entire meeting, and to you for joining us. Please have a safe and lovely evening. Thank you.